Konami put together some of the most amazing 8-bit games ever produced. I have in my hand two amazing bootleg Konami collections, and I will expound on all the amazing 8-bit Konami flavored details contained within by playing and rating each one. First up is the Konami 8-bit NES Game Classic Collection 55-in-1 NES Multicart Cartridge Remix Game Card 55-in-1 English version, a completely legitimate release that I got on AliExpress. The Adventure of Bayou Billy. The Adventure of Bayou Billy is a rather lackluster take on the Paul Hogan Crocodile Dundee movie series. This game was made way too hard when it was brought to America and is rather lackluster. C tier. Akumaju Special Boku Dracula-kun. Widely regarded as one of the greatest hidden gems that was left in Japan, Boku Dracula-kun, or Kid Dracula, is a 2D shoot-'em-up version, super deformed version of Castlevania, which plays a lot like Mega Man. I've seen better fan translations, and there actually was an official translation as this game was included in the Konami Castlevania collection. But it's still a great addition, and I would be surprised if it wasn't on here. S-Rank. One of the absolute best 2D Konami games made on 8-bit platforms. Not the best translation of this particular version, but that's still not going to stop it from being S-Rank. Antarctic Adventure. A pretty good, but very early Konami cartoon racing game starring Penta the Penguin. I know this because I made an entire video on this, which you need to go check out after this. A tier. Base Wars Cyber Stadium series. I mean, it's a well-drawn baseball game, but with robots instead of people, but they play baseball. I guess that's a thing. C tier. It's fine, but not for me. Batman Returns for NES. I mean, it was a little bit repetitive, but I don't know. It was an okay execution of an 8-bit port of a game that they developed for the 16-bit Super Nintendo, so it was an okay remake, but this was back in an era, back when movie tie-in games sort of sucked, and people expected them to suck. And it's fine. It's okay. C tier. I mean, it wasn't bad, but all the time I was sort of wishing I was playing the 16-bit game. Bill Elliott's NASCAR Challenge. There are a lot of games on here that have been completely blurred from my memory, like I had no idea that Konami actually made a 8-bit NASCAR simulation, and it looks like it's sort of based on some PC games at the time. I think this banked track approach was actually pretty cool, and it's pretty cool that they had sort of a car driving simulation on NES hardware. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Not my cup of tea. I'm going to give it a C tier, but if you were a NASCAR fan and grew up in the 1980s, I bet seeing this would be very impressive. Blades of Steel. Now, here's a Konami sports game that I do remember. Blades of Steel was well regarded as one of the more realistic action approaches to hockey, and a lot of people have this game highly in regard. Now, hockey's not my cup of tea, but it is fast and a really awesome put together game, and I really like the punching violence, which is one of the best parts of hockey. A tier. Bucky O'Hare. Now, Konami ended up making a lot of money off the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game series, so when the same publishers decided to try and go it again, Konami produced a really awesome game for it. Bucky O'Hare is sort of a Mega Man-like side-scrolling shooter, and it is one of the more rare Nintendo carts out there. It's one of the most expensive Nintendo carts out there, but it is quite a lot of fun. It's really well put together, and of all the Bucky O'Hare things, the Konami game is one of the best parts of it. S rank. Castlevania. I mean, what can really be said about this game? It is the most technically impressive Famicom disk system game turned into a cartridge, which really created one of the most beloved action series of all times. It is fun, it is creative, and it's on here. A tier. One of the most amazing NES games ever made. A tier. The only reason I didn't give it an S rank is it's not the Famicom Disk System version. But still, it's amazing. Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest. Well, you can't really blame Konami for trying to go in a different direction for a sequel. With Castlevania 2, it's sort of obvious that Zelda 2 was a big influence, and they evolved more of a linear action game to a branching path with non-linear gameplay, and the series is sort of getting closer to evolving into what we would know as a Metroidvania. Castlevania is still coming on its own. This game is loved by some, hated by others. I will say that the Famicom Disk System version would be a lot better if you don't have to deal with passwords. Not deserving of all the hate that it garners. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Castlevania 3: Dracula's Curse. A legend in its own right. The NES version of Castlevania 3 is quite darn good. It is where Castlevania really gelled into the branching paths, and you start to see what is definitely forming into Metroidvania. I used to be incredibly impressed with this game until I actually saw Akumajo Densetsu running on Famicom hardware with the expanded audio. So the NES version is okay, but it doesn't really raise a comparison to the original Japanese version, which really puts the Famicom audio hardware through the paces. But still, it's an absolutely incredible game. A tier. It is good. It is quite good. But in the modern day and age, if you haven't played the original Akumajo Densetsu, then give yourself a chance and see what the Famicom audio can do. Circus Charlie. Did you know that in 1986, Konami was involved in the production of an arcade game called Circus Charlie, which then had a Famicom port? starring a clown riding a lion who's jumping through rings of fire in a circus, but it plays horribly and is very difficult, and you and the lion ended up burned to death in a surprisingly easy display of animal pyromania. It is not good, and I'm glad to see that the company survived it. D tier, and it's well deserving of it. Contra, the NES version. When Konami set out to make the home version of Contra, they didn't just make an arcade port, but they actually expanded upon it, and on the FAMICOM version, they added cutscenes and a map. The American NES version did not have the palm trees waving, but they took note of the difficulty and actually added in the Konami code. So the American NES version of Contra is a very different beast, but a lot of people have very fond memories of this particular version, as do I. This is an absolute must-have, S rank. Contra Force. When is a Contra game not a Contra game? Well, it's when Konami took a completely separate game which plays a little bit like Contra, and then they rebrand it for the US release and call it Contra Force. If it seems like this is an odd one out, well, that's because they actually intended it to be a completely separate game. It's not terrible, but it's very underwhelming. C tier. Crack Out. Did you know that Konami actually made an Arkanoid clone, which is itself a Breakout clone that was released in Europe? I didn't. Apparently it's colorful and pretty well put together, and there's boss fights, but it's basically Arkanoid. It's good. I had no idea about it, and it's got that telltale Konami black outline. I'm glad I'm discovering something new. D tier. Crisis Force. Alright, here we get into the good stuff. So apparently, Crisis Force is one of the best 8-bit shooters ever made, and of course, it did not come to the US. It looks to be yet another really good 1991, later in Famicom lifespan game that apparently completely got ignored for the American release, which is too bad because this really looks like it has some amazing programming. Look at that, parallax scrolling. You don't see that on 8-bit systems. There are some really cool programming tricks on this game, and I'm really going to go back and play this game after I'm done with this video. SSS S-Rank! Double Dribble. Double Dribble is well regarded as one of the best 8-bit basketball games, and it's well known. I knew that it was popular. Again, not my cup of tea, but I can see that it is a competently made game that actually resembles the sport of basketball. So, A tier if you're into basketball. So, if you're into that sort of thing, A tier. Esper Dream 2. So a lot of people do not think of Konami as a JRPG maker, but they have pretty much had their finger in the pies of almost every single successful moneymaker genre in Japan, and one of the most lucrative is JRPGs. So this is an epic JRPG with real-time strategy and real-time action. So this is really exciting to see a fan translation of a really good but unreleased in America game, S-Rank. Gombre Gyeoman Gaiden, the first one. So, Konami actually made a full Gyeomon RPG that is a heck of a lot of fun. It is almost a parody of Dragon Quest, and it really works. I have played through about half of this game using a fan translation, and it is a lot of fun. It's set in ancient Japan, but there are posers and hipsters, and it's sort of a take on if Gyeomon made an Earthbound game. It's a parody role-playing game. It's a lot of fun, and it's a darn shame that this game series wasn't brought to America. But there's an excellent fan translation, and I definitely recommend you check it out, especially if you love JRPGs. A tier. Gombre Goemon Gaiden 2. Well, it ends up Konami made a sequel to the Gombre Goemon Gaiden first game, and it is again an excellent first-person role-playing game, or Dragon Quest style. The combat is first-person, turn-based role-playing games, and it's really good. They made a heck of a lot of role-playing games in Japan in the 1980s, and this is a parody-type game that uses the gameplay conventions popularized in Dragon Quest and Earthbound, an excellent JRPG that we didn't get in the US. A tier. Gradius. Alright, we are down to the classic, quintessential Konami shoot-'em-up game. It was one of their first hits on the Famicom. It is absolutely an amazing game. I enjoy playing it to this day. Gradius for NES, Famicom, S-Rank. Absolute S-Rank. Jack Nicklaus Golf. A very competent, very good golf game for the NES. I don't really have much to say about it. Nothing that good, nothing that bad. B tier. Jackal. This is a really good action game where you play a commando driving around in a jeep shooting things. It was originally made for the Famicom disk system, but we got it in the US on cartridge. Really fun, not that serious military action game. Jackal is A tier Konami. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Did you know that Konami published a version of King's Quest V for the NES? Well, I might have knew that at one point, but in my old age, I guess it passed my memory. But they did. They made a competent version of King's Quest V. If you like old school Scum Sierra games and you want to play one on NES, can't really go bad with King's Quest V, but I'm going to put it in a C tier. Nightmare 2, The Maze of Gallius. This is a side-scrolling action RPG made by Konami, originally for the MSX, and then the Famicom version got a sequel. This is well regarded in Japan, but we never got it in the US, so it's really excellent to see the inclusion of it on here as a fan translation. A tier. Konami Hyper Soccer. A very competent, exciting soccer game. I believe it was made originally for the Famicom disk system. Again, soccer games, not my thing, but it's competently done. B tier. Life Force. A Konami follow-up to Gradius that is not Gradius 2. Gradius 2 is a different game that I will definitely have to cover in a future video. But this is the American version of Life Force, so it only features 2 of the option pods. See my video about Famicom Better in Japan. And, you know, you needed to have Life Force on here. 2-player action. Really, really good. Not as good as the Famicom version, but A tier. Did you know that in 1991, Konami made a action game for the US market based on the Lone Ranger? I did not. Well, apparently it has side-scrolling segments, overhead, and first-person segments, and I believe it actually has zapper support. So, I didn't know about this game, but I'm definitely going to check it out. B tier. Madara. Apparently, this is a role-playing game based on the manga series set in a mythological era of Japan where a kid uses a prosthetic limbs to fight evil overlords who just happens to be his father. And they made a role-playing game using one of the largest Famicom cartridges, 4 megabits, and sound enhancement mapper chips, and it was apparently very well received role-playing game, which was not localized in the US. So again, you don't really think of Konami as a role-playing game maker, but I'm glad to see a decent fan translation of this game that we never got. B tier. Metal Gear. More specifically, the NES Famicom version of Metal Gear that Hideo Kojima did not approve of, since he actually made the original MSX versions, and he signed off on the original MSX versions, and these were done without him. But this was the version of Metal Gear that we first got in the US. It's the first time that I played it. A sneaky Legend of Zelda type game that had overhead gameplay, a lot of different options, a deep story. It is absolutely worth playing. Absolute S rank. I'm glad to see that there are other versions of other ways to play Metal Gear on MSX, but this is still a Konami masterpiece, even though Hideo Kojima does not approve of this particular version of the game. Still S rank. Konami's Noah Ark. I had no idea that Konami published a side-scrolling action game based on the Torah tale of Noah's Ark, made by a British game developer. It's a side-scrolling game involving Noah, who will run and jump, and you have to try to rescue animals, or at least move them to the Ark before the flood, as God sets out to smite the world and hit reset. So it's interesting because Nintendo of America didn't approve religious made games, but this was actually a officially published game that was sold in Europe. Konami's Noah's Ark. I had no idea. I'm going to give it a B tier for Sefer Bereshit. That's a Torah joke. Parodius. More specifically, the PAL version of Parodius that runs at a little too fast than it should on a regular NTSC system, and the only thing that they translated was the title screen. But it does have a modified Konami code. Not as good as the Famicom version, but an absolute amazing game. I'm glad that it's on here. A tier, but you should really play the original Famicom version unless you actually have a PAL CRT or you grew up with this version. Road Fighter. This is one of Konami's earliest games. It is based on more of a really old ColecoVision Atari era type game, more like Sega's Turbo, where you're driving north, trying to avoid the cars that are trying to run you off the road. It is really, really old. They did not bring this out to the US, but it is still an interesting piece of Konami history. C tier. Rush-N Attack. Originally made for the Famicom Disk System, not as action-packed as Contra, but still an excellent Konami military side-scrolling game. Nothing like taking on the entire Soviet army using nothing but a knife. You play a NATO soldier out to liberate Western Europe and make the world safe for capitalism by stabbing the communists right in their communist chests. It is an excellent action game. I played this as a kid. B tier. Skate or Die. Skate or Die for NES. I believe this is an NES conversion of a PC game featuring skateboarding, downhill, different styles. I loved this game as a kid. I'm glad that Konami published it, or at least Ultra Games did. And I'm glad that it's on here. Skate or Die, A tier. Skate or Die 2. I believe this was developed in the West. Still pretty darn good. And not as good as the first one, but if you like some 8-bit skateboarding games, I'm glad that it's on here. B tier. Stinger, or the Twin Bee, the second Twin Bee game, Morero Cinnamon Twin Bee, that this was originally made for the Famicom Disk System, but was brought to the US on Cartridge. It's a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, and definitely Konami B tier. B tier Konami side-scrolling action for Stinger. Super C, or Super Contra. This is the follow-up to Contra. Absolutely excellent. The NES version, formatted for horizontal, follow-up to a really great game. Absolutely one of the best Konami games. And I'm gonna put it on here. I originally wrote down A rank, but I'm gonna make it S rank. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Konami made a lot of money off this game. This game is loved by some, hated by some. It was one of the first pieces of licensed kit that was for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I believe it might have been before the TV show got as popular as it was. They were still trying to figure out what the Ninja Turtles were, and it's an interesting piece of history. I'm glad that it's on here. It's not without its faults. B tier. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, more specifically the NES version. A really impressive conversion of a 16-bit quintessential beat-em-up game, and the Famicom version is decent with all of the gameplay. Absolute Konami A tier. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. Again, a original follow-up to the arcade port, so this is the sequel to the arcade version. Great side-scrolling beat-em-up game on the Famicom/NES hardware. Absolute A tier. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fighters for the NES. Konami really milked that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle license for as much money as they could. This is a port of the 16-bit Street Fighter style fighting game, but they made a version for the NES. It's fine. I'm going to put it as a C tier. Apparently this version is also crazy expensive these days, but I'm glad that it is on here. C tier. The Goonies 1. So the version that we got in the US for The Goonies 2 was actually a sequel to this game, which was only released on the Famicom. It's one of the earliest Konami games made for the Famicom, but it is amazing. I'm really glad that it was included on here. Most Americans didn't get a chance to play The Goonies 1. I'm going to have to do some more videos on Konami games such as this, especially since I live in Oregon. The Goonies 1, S rank. The Goonies 2. This is a version that we did get in the US, featuring some first-person mazes, a lot of side-scrolling mazes, a sort of I guess it's based on the movie, as sort of a sequel to the movie, where the Goonies are out to rescue a mermaid friend of theirs. So, A tier for the Goonies 2. Tiny Toon Adventures. So, usually, when a licensed property in the 1980s got in their hands of a video game developer, the games that they made for them tend to be bad. The big example, or the biggest exception of that, is Konami. They actually made some pretty decent games based on the properties that they licensed, one of them being Tiny Toon Adventures. This is a pretty good side-scrolling platform game made by Konami, A tier. And when they had that license, they put out yet another Tiny Toons Adventure game, a very competent, very good side-scrolling platform game made by Konami, Tiny Toons Adventures 2, A tier. More of the same, but still pretty good. So they tried something different and made a Tiny Toon Adventures cartoon studio where you try to program your own short little cartoon skits using pre-made characters, and it's interesting that they try to make a non-game game, but didn't really hold a lot of interest for me. C tier. Alright, Top Gun for NES. They really made a fun action game that plays similar to Afterburner, and I had a lot of fun playing this as a kid. Top Gun was a very popular movie, and it was exciting to see flying around and shooting bad guys. Very 1980s. I found myself humming Danger Zone. Brought my own Kenny Loggins to playing this game. This game is notorious for having the landing sequences being difficult, but you know what? It's telling you right there. If you just follow the instructions, I can actually land the plane sometimes. So, the angry video game nerd, just follow the on-screen prompts and land that plane. B tier. I would have scored it higher if they had included some homoerotic volleyball actions, but they did not, so B tier. And Top Gun 2, because unlike Hollywood, they actually did make a sequel to Top Gun, and they did it rather quickly instead of waiting several decades. More of the same, flying around, blowing away bad guys in fighter jets, difficult landing, but, you know, pretty good since they started with a pretty good game to begin with. B tier. Track and Field 1. Now, I'm going to have to do a video on the Konami Hypershot controller. The fact that they actually made their own arcade-style button controllers and shipped it with a game on the Famicom, considering the Famicom actually had controllers that had built-in buttons. We never got the Hypershot controller in the US, but we did get Track and Field 1 or 2, which was a modified version to play with standard NES controllers. Really, really good button-mashing action game. Early Konami arcade action, ported home, B tier. And Track and Field 2, more button-mashing sports action, or track and field sports action for the NES. Track and Field 2, B tier. The Q-'em-up game series where it all began. Twinbee is regarded as one of the first Q-'em-ups and the prototype group Q-'em-up. You fly vertical, shoot bad guys, and is a very cute, fun time. Very simplistic, but was made before using memory mapper chips. A solid B tier. Twin Bee 3, which we did not get in the US. A vertical shoot-'em-up shooter, and using some more powerful memory mapper chips. Twin Bee 3, we never got it. Absolute A tier. Ya Kung Fu. So, the arcade version of Ya Kung Fu is one of the first side-scrolling one-on-one martial art fighting games. I absolutely love the arcade version. The Famicom version is, let's just say, not as robust, very difficult, not a straight conversion, and, you know, I'm glad it's on here for historic sake. We didn't get this in the US, and I played the Famicom version, and it's still pretty tough, so I'm gonna give it a C tier for Ya Kung Fu. Zen the Intergalactic Ninja. So apparently Konami licensed yet another Western property, and they made an isometric action game using Zen the Intergalactic Ninja. Some really interesting programming effects, cool graphic tricks. B tier. Alright, that was the all 55 games on the Konami 8-bit NES Game Classic Collection 55-in-1 NES Multicart Cartridge Remix Game Card 55-in-1 English version. A completely legitimate release that I got on AliExpress. Now to the other cartridge. I'm following it up with Konami Japan Collection 1 26-in-1 game cartridge for NES console 72 pins 8-bit video game card. This is a multi-cart containing many of the original Famicom versions as well as fan translations for a lot of games that were only released in Japan. This is a really awesome multi-cart, however, they have both the English and Japanese versions on here, so a lot of these games are on here twice, and they didn't have Ganbare Gyeomon 1. I mean, they have the Ganbare Gyeomon 2, and then the Ganbare Gyeomon Gaiden 1 and 2. But if you're going to give us, out of the 4 Ganbare Gyeomon games, if you're going to give us 3 out of the 4, why would you pass up on including Ganbare Gyeomon 1? Especially since there are fan translations of this game as well as an official translation. Bio Miracle Baby Hoopa, the English version. This is a side-scrolling action game which was originally released on the Famicom Disk System. It was considered a hidden gem that was not released in the US until it actually came out on the Wii Virtual Console. This is based on the cartridge version, and which is incredibly rare and expensive in Japan, since most people got the Famicom Disk System version. Absolutely glad that it's on here. A tier. Bio Miracle Bokote Upa, the Japanese version. Again, it's the same game, but the title screen is the original Japanese version. And that's fine. I don't know why they put it on here twice, but it's a great game. A tier. Contra, English. The English translation of the Japanese version of the game. My lord, this is worth purchasing right here. The official Famicom version of Contra is difficult because it doesn't have the Konami code, but it has cutscenes and the additional maps and some waving palm trees. And this is an English fan translation of the Japanese version of Contra. I am so glad this is on here. Absolute S rank, S rank, S rank, triple S rank. Wow. And they're following it up with Crisis Force in English, one of the most technically impressive shooters ever made, an incredible shoot-'em-up game, a complete hidden gem that was not released in the West. Crisis Force, S rank. Crisis Force Japanese version. What's that? You want to play the incredible vertical action shoot-'em-up game, but you don't want to have the home screen being translated into English? Well, they put the Japanese version on here. S rank. Dragon Scroll. This is a non-linear sandbox game, helped influence The Legend of Zelda, and it is a action role-playing game that was not previously released in the US, but this is an excellent fan translation. I'm really glad that it is on here. S rank. So, you like Dragon Scroll but you speak Japanese? Well, they hooked you up with the original Japanese version without that pesky English translation on here. Dragon Scroll in Japanese. Still, I'm gonna give it an A tier. Ganbare Gyeomon 2. This is an English fan translation of the second action game where you play the thief Gyeomon running around, leveling up, finding things. Absolutely great gameplay loop. We never got it in the US. Glad to see it on here in English. S rank. So it sucks that they had enough space on the cartridge to have Ganbare Gyeomon, the original Japanese language version, but not a fan translation of Ganbare Gyeomon 1. But if you speak Japanese, don't want to see the English translation, it's on here. B tier. Early on in the video, I sung the praises of Ganbare Gyeomon Gaiden, and it's on this cartridge. A fan translation of the really fun, satirical Ganbare Gyeomon parody of Dragon Quest, and sort of a parody of Earthbound, except I think it probably came out before Mother, or the first version of Earthbound. S rank. So, you speak Japanese and you want to play Ganbare Gyeomon Gaiden on a bootleg Chinese version of a multicart? Well, it's on here in pure Japanese. A rank. Not only did they make one Ganbare Gyeomon Gaiden RPG, the parody of Dragon Quest with Gyeomon, but they made a sequel, and this is an excellent fan translation here that we never got in the US. S rank. Sounding like I'm repeating myself, but Ganbare Gyeomon Gaiden, the Japanese language version, on this multicart, if you speak Japanese, it's on here. A rank. Gradius 2. I'm actually really impressed that they were able to get this on here. Gradius 2, the really amazing follow-up to the quintessential side-scrolling shooter. We did not get Gradius 2 translated into the US. We never got an official release, but I'm really glad to see that the Famicom version is on here. S rank. I Am Kid Dracula, a fan translation of the super deformed shoot-'em-up action game, which is like Konami making a Mega Man game, but based on the Castlevania game series. A slightly better English translation than the one that was on the other cart. A rank. So, you want to play the untranslated original version of Bokura Dracula-kun? Well, it's on here. The original untranslated version is easy to play, but the minigame instructions are going to be in Japanese, and you're probably going to need a FAQ if you can't speak Japanese for the quiz game later on. So, Bokura Dracula-kun, Japanese untranslated, A tier. The Legend of Fuma, a side-scrolling Castlevania-like game starring Japanese mythology about a samurai who goes to Japanese hell to fight demons and whatnot. It is one of the greatest Konami Castlevania games that we never got in the US, never translated, a real hidden gem. It's on here, translated, S rank. Getsu Fumaden, the original version. It's on here, untranslated, the Japanese version, A rank. Parodius Da, the Cute-em-up shooter series. This is the first game that was released on the Famicom, translated into English, running at proper NTSC frame rate. Just for the fact that they finally got it on here in English using the proper frame rate, I'm going to give it an S rank. And why not include the original untranslated version of Parodius? Well, the Famicom version is on here. A tier. Twinbee 3, the only released in Japan vertically scrolling cute-em-up. Well, it's on here with a fan translation in English. A tier. What's that? You want to play Twinbee 3 for Famicom, but you don't want the title screen translated into the King's English? Well, the Japanese version is on here. A tier. YY World, which is a Japanese onomatopoeia for noisy crowded. So this is a side-scrolling action game starring Konami Man or Konami Lady, but they can switch to the various characters from the Konami heroes from other Konami games. This is sort of like a side-scrolling Mega Man level, but the optional guest stars are Konami Man, Konami Lady, Gilman, Simon Belmont 3, Getsufuma, Mikey from Goonies, Moai from the Moai games, King Kong, Upa from Biomiracle Bokute Upa, Penta from An Arctic Adventure, Vic Viper, and Twinbee, because there's also a shooter stage. Why? Because of Konami. YY World, I'm glad to see it on here, translated in English. S rank. Hey, you want to play the original YY World, but not in English? Well, the original Japanese version is on here. A tier. Well, they made a sequel to YY World 2, starring more Konami hero goodness, and you can switch between the characters in as a power-up. Really awesome graphics. And again, we never got this in the US. I'm glad that it's on here using a fan translation. S rank. Well, you want to play the original YY World 2 in the original language, but you're not going to use it on an EverDrive or an original cartridge? Well, there's this bootleg Chinese cartridge multicart available here for you, and YY World 2 on here in Japanese. A tier.
I almost feel ashamed that I had to buy these bootleg. I wish that Konami and other companies would officially manufacture collections on cartridge and put them on sale for all the 8-bit otaku nerds of the world. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and please share these videos with anyone who's even mildly amused by retro video games. This is 8-bit Joystick. Stay awesome. Play retro.